É um grande prazer estar aqui com vocês para essa nossa mesa redonda, dedicada a uma discussão muito importante, que pode ser resumida a partir dessa questão. Qual papel pode desempenhar a mediação na mudança digital? A mudança digital, como todos sabemos, é um processo pelo qual a sociedade integra plenamente as tecnologias digitais em diversas atividades, podemos dizer em muitas atividades. Ela se reforçou durante a pandemia e essa mudança afeta inúmeros campos, incluindo as práticas de comunicação, negociação e resolução de conflitos. É importante refletir sobre a relação específica entre a mediação e o ambiente tecnológico de sua implementação. Portanto, propomos aqui algumas questões para ajudar na discussão, tanto nos aspectos teóricos quanto nos aspectos práticos. Na forma de conceber a mediação, de acordo com o ambiente tecnológico em que se realiza, quais são os efeitos das novas tecnologias sobre as práticas de mediação? Existem elementos de ruptura ou continuidade entre a mediação tradicional e a mediação digital? A transformação de alguns princípios fundadores da mediação? Trata-se de uma lista de perguntas que, obviamente, não é exaustiva, e para ajudar a respondê-las ou a alimentar nossa reflexão, temos conosco Emilia Bellucci, Nádia Alexander e Rui Pinto de Almeida, a quem agradeço muito por ter aceito nosso convite de maneira tão solícita. Lembro aqui alguns princípios de funcionamento da nossa mesa redonda. Em um primeiro momento, haverá exposições de, no máximo, 15 minutos, podendo sofrer pequenos de cada palestrante. Em seguida, formularei algumas perguntas para que haja um debate entre nós. Então, peço que as respostas sejam de natureza breve, sejam breves. Enfim, será aberta a possibilidade de o público dirigir perguntas, certo, às pessoas convidadas. Lembro da necessidade de falarmos devagar para facilitar o trabalho da equipe de tradução, a quem agradeço a colaboração. Então, em primeiro lugar, temos a Emilia Bellucci. Good night, Emilia. Emilia está na Austrália, então ela já está no dia de amanhã, certo? Está voltando hoje para conversar com a gente. Ela é professora na Deakin Business School, no Departamento de Sistemas de Informação e Análise. Trabalha no ensino superior há mais de 15 anos e atualmente é diretora associada da escola. Pesquisa sistemas de apoio à negociação, desenvolvimento e avaliação de tecnologias para a tomada de decisão nos campos empresarial, da família e da saúde, entre outros, com publicação de numerosos artigos em revistas e publicações internacionais. So, Emilia, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Now I leave you the words to speak.
Thank you, Ricardo, for a wonderful introduction. I will now share my screen. So without further ado, the objective of my presentation is to present learnings from my studies into face-to-face negotiation and how they can support online dispute resolution. The aim of this research is to think of how computers can help rather than hinder communication in computerized systems, moving to how computers can then model all aspects of negotiation. I will firstly discuss the motivations of my research, definitions and assumptions of negotiation and online dispute resolution, otherwise also known by negotiation support systems. Then I will introduce my 3 aspects of negotiation for the purposes of modelling negotiation. the role of face-to-face, that is, of emotions in negotiations, and finally then any learnings we can take from that into online dispute resolution design. Face-to-face is the preferred way in which we negotiate because this is the best way to resolve disputes. It's the richest form of communication, which is what we need for these complex discussions. But online dispute resolution challenges this view because there is no or very limited face-to-face interaction on these portals. So to move forward, we need to know what is appealing in face-to-face and hence what we want to model in an online dispute resolution forum, and perhaps also what we don't want. So in that way, we are then suggesting new aspects encompassing the positive experiences from a face-to-face medium for an online dispute resolution design. So I essentially want to understand why face-to-face is our preferred, and so I can add to it for the online design that I'd like to propose. And this is a problem I want to solve. As a technologist, though, this is quite challenging because I have always, and my discipline has always had a tendency to build it and then make it fit. If we look at perhaps the way that artificial intelligence these days is being built, it's more like there's the technology, but we are now struggling how we should be using this more effectively. Negotiation is about personal communication with the goal of resolving a conflict. It's done collaboratively and assumes coordinated behaviour between the disputants. Negotiation is a process of dispute resolution between two persons, while a mediation involves a mediator to help progress the negotiation towards the goal of resolving some conflict. So there's my basic definition so far. I've also made some assumptions in what I'm presenting today. And that is that I'm not making any very clear comparisons to the legal frameworks and legal processes as a measure of success. There have always been comparisons to what you do in mediation and comparing it to a court process. I find enough in that we have comparisons between face-to-face and with with what I'm trying to present. So that's as much comparison as I want for now. Okay, in modelling negotiation, there are three main elements that I'd like to present, and this will be useful in understanding how we can automate negotiation. I will mainly focus on the first element in presenting research, but then I will also reflect on the other aspects as well. So face-to-face involves both verbal and non-verbal language, as we are all aware of. In the non-verbal language, it includes body language, facial cues, and micro-expressions. It also involves the mechanism of feedback, which is necessary for quick clarification of messages. Face-to-face also allows for the easy identification of emotions. And this is where my interest was piqued, because that is what makes us truly human. This is what makes the negotiation what it is. Now, through my research, I have found that when expressing emotion, the actual words are given less attention. So that is a very interesting finding, that if we have emotions being expressed at the same time as words, the emotions take precedence. We also do know from literature that experienced negotiators learn to hide their emotions, which can create an uneven playing field. And this is an interesting fact, I know from my own personal experience, that it is quite much human nature to sometimes ignore what we don't want to see or hear when we're talking to people, or in this case, when we're resolving some conflict. So should we remove emotion from a negotiation? You know, I want to now know what is the role of emotion in conflict. So conflict and emotion are quite linked. We know we are in a dispute when we feel emotional. Emotion depends on the context. So, for example, the type of emotion depends on the context. For example, in family law, it would be more highly emotional because you're dealing with a personal relationship that's broken down, particularly if there are children involved, it's even more heated. Then we have the psychological disposition of disputants, and this may involve whether they like conflict, whether they tend to are avoiders of conflict. And then there are also our experiences we bring to the table from our interactions with others, you know, through other negotiations. However, face-to-face may not always be appropriate. And this is through the literature where we have found that if negative emotions are expressed, face-to-face is then now more, well, if negative emotions are expressed, you're less likely to achieve a settlement or agreement. And face-to-face is also prone to that emotional flooding, which can cause then, you know, that the emotion takes over the case and it's much harder to deal with the issues at hand. There have been quite a number of studies done in online dispute resolution and emotions. Here are a few samples, and I will also include my work in this area so far. So many studies are in the literature. Here is just a small sample. We have found the expression of negative emotions leads to the delay and prevention of settlements, which is an interesting finding. And we should also take note of emotional tone when emotions are expressed. The second dot point there is around my own work, in that we found in my in experiments we have run, that when we have found that the propensity of disputants to resolve a dispute is directly related to the emotional intelligence of the disputants, which is a replication of a finding in a face-to-face setting, which is very exciting for a scientist like myself to know that we are replicating a human experience. The third dot point is around researchers where they compare face-to-face and e-negotiation and found there was no difference in the outcome. So yet again, another replication. But in this case, they found that the disputants used icons when they were talking to each other. So they were expressing emotion. There are other designs that haven't had any artifact attached to it, and these were where they thought of, you know, expressing emotion through visualizing them on the screen and then using questionnaires to capture emotional states of the disputants. So now, going back to my 3 aspects of negotiation, which I mentioned earlier, and I mentioned them earlier because now I'm going to go back and fill them in to see, well, what learnings can we take from what I have presented today to come up with some foundations of where perhaps we can take online dispute resolution design into the future. So the first one is around how do we deal with interpersonal communication. Essentially, text is a great motivator here because it can slow down negotiations and allow disputants to clarify their thoughts through the text. Given our previous studies, we know that online tools can filter negative emotions. Given our previous studies, we know that there can be AI tools that can filter negative emotions and use icons and larger text boxes to allow for clarifying statements. Of course, we are all very versed in how we communicate through phone, video, text boxes, and email. These are all commonly available, but there may be a space in which we can develop tools to filter emotions to allow perhaps only positive emotions through the mediation, that is something we want to try. So there's a quick suggestion. The second one was around document and process management tools. These refer to these data storage places, where we hold all documents and data relating to a case in the one location. I'm sure we know very much about this. It's very common these days that we use the one place to store all our documents, particularly when we are involved in collaborative decision-making or in project teams. So I'm referring to Google Docs, OneDrive, MS Teams. However, as these are cloud-based, it is important to resolve privacy and security issues before we consider using them, for this very sensitive information. One way in which we can get around that is where we have a dedicated platform, such as Modra, which is used in legal mediations. I suppose now, this is my own thoughts coming through here, where I feel that a platform like that has been very useful for a long time. But ever since COVID, I have started to see that we are becoming much more of the digital native, in which we are much more used to using these sort of platforms on a daily basis. So I can see a move in the future where we are starting to use these systems much more as a commonplace rather than relying on those big platforms that are readily available. And then the third one is a space where I have done a bit of work in, and this is in decision-making, in modelling negotiation. And this is where I take my computer science knowledge through. Traditionally, and I say traditionally because there have been a lot of tools in this space from the 1980s, 1990s, and onwards. So traditionally, where artificial intelligence has been involved in negotiation support systems, it was in these early attempts using case-based reasoning, and this is where computers would make recommendations based on similar past cases that are in their database, but also using neural networks and machine learning. In the past, these were not commercial because organisations did not have the data to support the AI to work, but now we do. And so we're starting to see more of a push in using artificial intelligence in this way. There is now a new term in the literature that I've started to see just this previous year, and that is around the fourth party. This is where the technology is now becoming an integral part of negotiation. And by a fourth party, we mean in the context of a mediation. Commercial systems are often in e-commerce, and they use simple arithmetic in disputing costs to arrive at, say, compromise solutions. Examples include eBay, PayPal, dispute resolution centres. These heavily rely on these chat systems as well. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they do use natural language processing. Other examples are Smart Settle, which many of you may have heard, which provide optimal solution packages. And then I have my systems, which I've developed over a number of years in family unit asset divider. And these use humanistic trade-off scenarios, strategies, trade-off, in order to present scenarios or packages on how the asset pool between two divorcing couples can then be divided. So to end off, I don't know how long I've taken, Ricardo, but I think I'm okay. We are identifying I have identified the three mechanisms for negotiation support, focusing on learning how computers can help manage emotions, which is something of primary interest at the moment. I look forward to conducting more research in hybrid approaches to ODR and in decision support using artificial intelligence. And last but not least, I do want to thank everyone for listening, and I look forward to our discussions which will follow. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Emilia, for your contribution. It was very interesting to me. Eu conheço muito pouco da mediação com o suporte da tecnologia, então já está sendo uma aprendizagem muito grande. Depois voltaremos no debate com algumas questões.